And we are back like we never left. Oregon fans, what's going on? Thanks for tuning in to another episode of the Ducks Dish podcast. It is Thursday, December 8th, 2022, and we have a jam-packed episode for you today as there is a ton of news in the Oregon football community. I'm your host, Max Torres. That's my guy, Spencer McLaughlin. He's the host of Locked On Ducks and Locked On Pac-12. Glad to have him back for another episode. And today we're going to be breaking down Will Stein, Oregon's new offensive coordinator, was officially announced on Wednesday. So we're going to break that down as well as another tidbit. But before we get into that, Spencer, how you doing, man?
We're doing well. It is a busy time. And, all this stuff flying around and news and recruits and the offensive coordinator hire, of course, which we'll get into. And I think getting lost in the shuffle is Oregon, I think, has an intriguing bowl game matchup with North Carolina and a chance to put together back-to-back 10-win seasons. I think for the first time since 2013-14 and then 14-15. I think that was the last time the Ducks had back-to-back 10-win campaigns, if memory serves. So, that's still a good thing. I know it's not the bowl game that we were hoping for, certainly, but I'm a sucker for bowl season because I love college football, and then you look up and it's gone, and you're like, well, I want more college football. So I enjoy it every single year. Ducks a big favorite right now.
Yeah, that's going to be an interesting matchup, a fun one to watch, especially as we continue to track, opt-outs with the NFL draft and transfer portal news. So there's no shortage of things to talk about right now. And anytime you can win, you have an opportunity to win 10 games, especially with the first-year head coach. I think that's something that you'll take. So the season definitely didn't go the way Oregon fans expected or hoped, definitely towards the end. But there's it's not all hope is lost. Before we get into the Stein news, if you guys are joining us here live on YouTube, youtube.com/Oregon Football Max Torres, appreciate you guys stopping by to talk some Duck football. Do me a favor, hit that like button. Hit that like button for me and subscribe to the channel and drop a comment. Let me know how you're feeling about this hire for me. And then same goes if you guys are watching on replay. But before we get into Stein, there's a little bit of recruiting news that I want to get into this morning. That is five-star edge rusher Mateo Uiagalelei has announced a top 3 of Oregon, USC, and Ohio State, which is a significant update because obviously Oregon's still in the running here, but Georgia is not listed as a finalist. They kind of tried to make a little bit of a late push. Mateo actually reached out to them is what he told me. My feel on this is that it's still a USC, Ohio State kind of deal. But Oregon landing in these finalists is definitely not going to hurt them.
Yeah, it's where you'd like to be, have a chance to get a guy of this caliber, especially when you look at what Oregon was particularly weak at this year, and that was the defensive line getting after quarterbacks consistently. And I think the secondary played better than a lot of people give them credit for. Certainly, there were moments. We don't need to relive the Washington game specifically where they really struggled, but your secondary can only do so much if you don't have a pass rush. You have got to pressure the quarterback so he can't get through 3 progressions, so that he's feeling the heat a little, can't set his feet. There's a myriad of things you've got to be able to do defensively, and one of them is rushing the passer because that allows your secondary to have a better chance to succeed. So it would be a great get. It does look like USC is kind of in the lead. I don't know if you knew this, Max. There's actually a musical tie to USC. Mateo is a music creator. I don't know if he actually does the rapping on his songs. I think
The producer.
he's the producer. So that's a big interest of his, and so USC is going to lend more towards that particular career path for him, or hobby, whatever you want to call it. And I don't think that's something you could overlook. It's certainly not the only reason, right? USC just played in the Pac-12 championship game. Lincoln Riley and that defense, they're going to have opportunities to play. You'd have that at Oregon as well, but it's not as if, Lincoln Riley is a small name in the college football world. He's a pretty big one. So there's definitely a chance. We should not be ruling that out. But I think Oregon is – I think they're closer to second from what I've gathered. But it does look like USC is kind of solidly in first place right now.
Yeah, last thing on that, and then we'll get to the hire, is last time I talked to Mateo was when he told me about Georgia kind of hopping into the picture here. They were working on an official visit to get out there. I'm not actually sure if they ended up taking that or not over this past weekend, but I believe that's when it would have landed. And then I asked him as far as, any chance he'll get back out to Eugene or any other schools. And he was saying, well, not right now, but if I were to take any of those, it would kind of come together last minute. And, that lends itself to, well, what school can he go to, pretty last minute? Oh, well, USC is right in his backyard. And he was on campus for that USC Notre Dame game. So we'll continue tracking that recruitment. He's going to be an early signee, early enrollee guy wherever he ends up. But yeah, I'm kind of in the same field there, Spencer. I feel like it's a USC Ohio State deal right now, but there's still some time, and we'll see what happens. No doubt that Oregon's going to be stopping by for some in-home visits. I would think the coaches have been all over the country, but let's get into the big news of the day. It looks like a couple people are asking maybe if you could.
Yeah, I just cranked it up. I saw "See Me on the big screens" comment, and my guy
Okay.
Eddie the Hog is saying the
It
same
sounds a little
thing.
bit better.
So if that sounds better, let me know, and we can continue to tweak. It is not set in stone how loud the audio is, and it's all confusing and yada 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 and whatnot. But if that's good enough, just let us know. If you want me to go up a little more, let me know.
Okay, hopefully that's a little bit better. Appreciate you adjusting on the fly, Spencer. But let's get into this news, man. A little over a week ago, Oregon fans, they found themselves in a pretty rough spot, right? You lose your second rivalry game of the year to Oregon State in absolutely embarrassing fashion, collapse in the second half, and then I remember after I finished watching that game, I was heading out to Sierra Canyon for a high school football game, and then the news broke that Kenny Dillingham was going to be going to Arizona State, and Duck fans found themselves, looking for a new offensive coordinator. Questions swirling around Dante Moore's commitment, seeing that Kenny Dillingham was the primary recruiter there as the quarterbacks coach and OC. But now here we are. Will Stein comes over from UTSA to be the new offensive coordinator for the Ducks under Dan Lanning. He's only 33, but he has a really solid track record, got elevated to the co-offensive coordinator and quarterbacks role this past year, put up a lot of numbers for UTSA with the Roadrunners, leading them to a Conference USA championship over North Texas. Just my initial thoughts. I really like the hire. I think that the term splash hire gets thrown around quite a bit in the era of the coaching carousel. But I thought that this was a hire that he needed to make in terms of a guy that was innovative, young, willing to adjust to the game, has a fresh look at offensive schemes. And I think another thing with the youth definitely comes the recruiting stuff. So I think that that those are some of the kind of early points that I want to get to. But I like the hire. I think that it's definitely an impressive one. And the other thing I was going to add real quick is that when we were talking to Dan on Sunday about the search, he was saying, I made some hires last year and some people were questioning those, but I think the results speak for themselves. So that was kind of cool to see him, speak with his chest a little bit like, hey, I can do this hire thing, even though I'm a first year head coach. So we have to see what the early returns are going to look like, but I'm feeling it. I like it.
Yeah, I think it reminds you a lot of Kenny Dillingham. Like he's a really young guy. He's relatively inexperienced, though the results are impressive in some sense. And he hadn't been a play caller before. I think that's the biggest difference between, evaluating the Dillingham hire at the time and evaluating Will Stein here is that we've seen him for just one season, but still one, what he's like as a play caller. We've seen him call plays, be situational, be, the guy who has to make the adjustments with the play calls and everything like that. And again, let me know if I'm still too quiet, everybody, but I have no idea what's going on. I don't pretend to understand technology at all.
It sounds better on my end.
Okay, well that's encouraging. But so I think with Will Stein, you have an impressive track record. Is it a lengthy one? No, it's not. And so I think Dan Lanning is making a very concerted effort here to keep with what he knows works, and that's a young, up and coming offensive mind that he feels could potentially be a head coach one day. And the thing I want to point out on that front is Louisville just hired Jeff Brom, and
Big
that's
hire.
where, and that is where Will Stein played his college football. He was a quarterback at Louisville, so that would have been the most obvious one of like, well, That's the one that's probably going to come and offer him. So they just hired a head coach. Unless he flames out and goes one and done, there's no obvious place where he'd potentially get interest as a head coach. And I know that Duck fans get frustrated with that sort of stuff. I do at some level, but on the other hand, I would rather have a coordinator that people want than a coordinator that people don't want. Like, perfect example. This year for the Ducks, you had Kenny Dillingham, you had Tosh Lupoy. Kenny Dillingham got a lot of interest as a head coach from Arizona State, ends up taking the job. Tosh Lupoy got none. Which one were you more happy with this season? Pretty easy question, right? The answer is very clearly Kenny Dillingham. So I like that he's going this route because I think he's looking at it and saying, I know that this kind of worked before, hiring a young up and comer rather than a veteran presence, rather than a guy who would come in with a bunch of experience. Like I wouldn't have been opposed to a Dan Mullen, a Tom Herman, somebody like that with a lot of experience and coaching reps in college football. But this is what Lanning clearly wants to do. And I think there are advantages from a recruiting standpoint when you hire a guy like this and bring him from the G5 level. I think there are fair questions to ask too, but I think he's looking at it and saying, we want someone who's been brought up in the new age of college football offense and is running modern concepts and understands them. Isn't, learning them on the fly or having to adapt to them, but rather it's the only thing that he really knows. And, Stein is a little bit more pass heavy than what we saw this year, but we'll see how much Lanning, kind of influences their run pass balance once he starts calling plays.
Yeah, and I think just to stay on what you were saying a little bit about the recruiting, it's such an interesting deal, especially when you pick up a guy from the group of 5 level, right? Because you don't see a lot of group of 5 schools, signing 5 stars left and right, or, pulling a lot of weight on the recruiting trail. But there's a couple of things to look at with this, right? I think regardless of who Oregon hired as their offensive coordinator, they're going to be able to go into homes and sell Oregon. And to a degree, Oregon is one of those brands in college football that sells itself. Does that mean that I can go and recruit for Oregon and land all these 5 stars? No, that's not what I'm saying. But Oregon
have some
is a
confidence
brand,
in yourself, Maxwell.
Oregon is a brand that sells itself to a certain degree. You get yourself into some conversations when Oregon, enters the picture. And then there's the youth, only 33 years old. A lot of times people associate that youth with, being a go-getter and being relentless on the recruiting trail. So I'm sure that was a conversation that Dan Lanning had with Will Stein when he was, looking at maybe bringing him on board here. So I think that's one of my first priorities for sure. If I'm Will Stein, is getting on the phone with Dante Moore or maybe trying to get out to Detroit for another in-home if they're able to kind of say, hey, here's what my kind of vision is for the offense. This is where I see you kind of fitting in and, keeping that role. So I think on that front, with the recruiting, I don't want to beat the drum too much there, but that is what I like to cover. Obviously, you have some stability now ahead of the early signing period, which starts on December 21st. So the timing of this hire is definitely crucial with regard to that. And then also the transfer portal, you can kind of see how some of these pieces are going to be moving. Oregon's running back room is going to be pretty revamped with Sean Dollars and Byron Cardwell entering the portal. And then Dante Dowdell is slated to come in the 23 class. So that's another thing that you have to look at. And then the Ducks are making some offers in the transfer portal. Dorian Singer was a big one out of Arizona. So it's nice that Will Stein is here so that they can really get started now on figuring out what next year's roster is going to look like, because Lanning said that he isn't going to expect that new hire, which is now Will Stein, to coach in the Holiday Bowl.
And you knew that this hire had to be coming right around this time because of the recruiting component, but also, Dillingham was announced to us officially as Arizona State's next head coach, in the waning hours after the Oregon game, because he was flying from Eugene down to Phoenix and getting over to Tempe to be introduced the following day as the Sun Devils' new head coach. But Dan Lanning did not find out hours after the Oregon game that Dillingham was leaving. Like, they've had a relationship going back several years when they've been on staffs together. They, of course, worked together this season. Like, I find it hard to believe that Lanning just was kept in the dark completely by Kenny Dillingham with regards to, hey, I'm interviewing for this job. Looks like I'm going to get it. And after the season, unless we get to the championship game or whatever, I'm going to take it. So I think this is the guy that Lanning wanted, and you shouldn't have any concern about, like, well, was it kind of rushed? Was it this or that? Like, this has been in the works for weeks, I'm sure. And Stein was still able to have success at UTSA, even as he was interviewing and talking to Lanning about this job and whatnot. But you did need to have a name there, because when you're on the recruiting trail, you can get by, I feel like, with a name in theory, and be like, yeah, this is the guy we're going to bring up. But at some point, Will Stein has to be able to pick up the phone, call Dante Moore, and say, hey, this is what we do offensively. This is a vision for you. And start to build that relationship there. Because though Lanning is doing a lot, he's not an offensive coach. He's not the play caller. So you have to be able to start to formulate that relationship. So I think the timing of it all makes sense. And I am intrigued to see what the offense looks like without Dillingham calling the plays in the bowl game. I would imagine it'll probably be Junior Adams and Drew Maringer, the tight ends coach. They'll probably share, or one of them will have the play calling duties. Adams would probably be more likely. He's called plays in the past before, but I like the hire overall. Timing of it makes sense, and I think the biggest question is recruiting, Max, because anytime you bring someone from the G5 level, it's different. You're kind of accustomed, even at a good program like UTSA that's become really successful. They're in the top 25, Conference USA champions this year, an 11-win season. They've won 10 games in a row. Like, they have had, I think they were 12-0 at one point last year, and then they lost in the conference championship game, but they won it this year. They played Texas tight for about 3 quarters or so on the road. Like, it's become a good program there, and I think it's still fair to ask, you recruit one way, going after a certain caliber of players against other caliber of schools that are similar when you're at UTSA, but what's it like when you make that jump? What is it like when you start recruiting against Lincoln Riley for the same offensive recruit? What's it like when you start recruiting against Deion Sanders, against Kalen DeBoer at Washington, or any of the other offensive coaches, Chip Kelly? But that's probably more transfer portal because he's not big on the high school recruiting trail. So I think that's a legitimate question to ask. It's not a negative or a knock. It's just that's a question I have. There's no indication one way or the other that it's going to be great or that it's going to be terrible. I think what we do know is we'll probably see him continue to use his ties to the state of Texas to recruit players out of there, because there's like an unlimited amount of good players coming out of the state of Texas. And Oregon and Dan Lanning have really made that more of a focus on the recruiting trail, whereas Cristobal and company were very heavy in Florida. I think Lanning and Lupo and everyone are going more to Texas. So on that front, it makes sense as well.
We're going to go ahead and take a quick break here for those of you listening to us on the audio platforms, and we'll talk more about Will Stein's hire, recruiting impact, and what the offense might look like. Don't go anywhere. We got more for you after this. Welcome back to the Ducks Dish Podcast. I'm your host, Max Torres. That's Spencer McLaughlin, and we're breaking down the Will Stein hire as Oregon's new offensive coordinator. The last recruiting note I wanted to get into, Spencer, you kind of touched on it a little bit before the break. Oregon could find themselves, I think, regardless almost of what happens, they could find themselves going after probably at least one more quarterback. We still got to see what happens with Bo Nix's decision. We got to make sure that we see Dante Moore sign his national letter of intent. So there's still some question marks up in the air, some TBDs. But with Will Stein's ties to the state of Texas, that could pay tremendous dividends on the recruiting trail. We've already seen Oregon kind of linked to Hudson Card, the Texas transfer quarterback who is from Lake Travis High School, where Stein spent some time on that coaching staff. But I think that, to your point, I think his roots in the state of Texas are going to be huge. You got Matt Powledge, who is on staff, and he has Texas ties as well. It's going to be pretty difficult to get really, set up in the state of Florida, I think, compared to Texas, just because of that natural distance hurdle. I'm not saying it can't be done, but I really do like how this shapes up to help Oregon get back into the Lone Star State in an even bigger way. We know they're still going after David Hicks, Ashton Porter, Damian Sanford, a bunch of guys out of the Lone Star State. So that's another big benefit, I think, that's really going to help Oregon moving forward.
Yeah, and it makes a lot of sense, because you're going to want to recruit if you're Oregon in the state of California. Of course, they've done that. I think Cristobal really brought that into the forefront about how possible that is, and we've seen the caliber of players that you can get from down there, Kayvon Thibodeau most notably among them. But the three biggest recruiting states, and you know this, Max, being out there on the trail all the time in the country, are California, Texas, and Florida. And I think if you're going to be a program that recruits at a high level, the level that Oregon needs to in order to continue to contend for conference championships and hopefully get back to the college football playoff, I don't think you can have just one of those three states where you have a heavy presence. And it's just so many players. There are a lot of schools in Texas too, but Oregon is a really premier brand on the recruiting front. And I think we've seen that over the last several years. They're knocking on the door of another top 10 recruiting class here in Dan Lanning's first cycle as the head coach. And the competition from a recruiting standpoint is going to continue to heat up in California with USC and Lincoln Riley there. That, isn't going away even when they go to the Big Ten, right? And then I think what you'll see is once USC and UCLA are Big Ten programs, then the other Big Ten schools might feel a greater sense of urgency to come and recruit in the Los Angeles area because you have more visibility for those Big Ten schools. But I think it remains important for Oregon to be there, and I think getting into Texas is a great place to be because high school football, like everything, it's just bigger in Texas, right? It's just bigger. It just means more there, and so you can get some really high level players, and we've seen that, right? Johnny Bowens is from Texas, so is Tyler Turner. There are, I think, a couple more players in this recruiting cycle that are from the Lone Star State for the Ducks. So I think it makes a lot of sense. It's not like you want to bring in someone who can go recruit somewhere like Arizona more or Utah or anything like that. I think Oregon's got enough of a foothold or ability to pull recruits from there to where you do want to kind of double down on your ability to recruit out of the state of Texas.
Let's look at this comment from Nick Flowers. Nick says, I love the hire. Binge watched a bunch of UTSA highlights, and man, they like to go fast. Also, huge stats for their quarterback and wideouts. Yeah, that was one of the things I really liked when I saw, some little clips going around the interwebs of Will Stein saying he likes to take 8 deep shots per game, 2 per quarter, and then kind of mixing that tempo. It's not always going at that breakneck speed, but learning how to kind of manage the tempo and when to really push ahead. And that was one of the things I liked from Dillingham. I feel like it was very noticeable this year when Oregon was trying to go tempo and when they were just trying to take the air out of the ball, like in that 10-minute drive against Washington that should have won them the game. But really like the kind of overall offensive philosophy, some of the early tidbits we're seeing from Will Stein, especially taking deep shots, because that was something that we did not see enough of in the past couple of seasons under Mario Cristobal. Kenny Dillingham switched that up real quick, and look at what it did for Oregon's offense.
Yeah, and it's encouraging to hear him say, before he comes to Oregon, that that's a part of his offensive philosophy. I think we saw that this year with the numbers he's able to put up through the air. But I think the biggest question will be, what does Oregon's rushing attack look like with Will Stein as the offensive coordinator? And this is a balance that, always comes into play when you have a head coach who's not the play caller and in fact comes from the other side of the ball, and then your offensive coordinator is how much influence is Lanning going to have? Because I wonder, is he going to just hand the reins over to Stein entirely and, Oregon's offense next year will look different? Or is he going to say, hey, these are some formational packages that we ran and had success with this year. We want to work these in. We want to run the ball in this way. We want to do this way or that way or anything like that. And I'm curious to see what it looks like. Our first taste of it won't be the bowl game. It'll be the spring game to get an understanding of what that really means for the Ducks offense going forward and how it will look and also how successful it will be. I think he'll have a lot of personnel to have success with, but I do think Oregon still needs to make some roster changes. They probably need a wide receiver. I would love Dorian Singer. I would be thrilled. I was shocked he even went in the portal. I was really surprised. Arizona is an upward trajectory program. He's been an integral part of their offense all season long. He's second team all Pac-12, along with our guy Troy Franklin. Jaden Delora is a good quarterback. Jed Fish looks like a good coach. Their recruiting's getting better. I was really surprised at that, and I think that's one Oregon should be looking to capitalize on. Because if you put Singer out there with, the thing that Stein likes to do, I think more than what we saw this year, is put 4 receivers on the field and just go 10 personnel, 1 back, no tight ends. So if you think about Oregon's 4, like if you were going to go a 4 wide look right now as Oregon's offense currently stands with Dante Thornton gone, Max, who are those guys? Troy Franklin, Chris
Chris.
Hudson.
Then you get a little bit murky
And then
there.
yeah, you don't know. And that's, where I'm interested to see how this evolves, because formationally this year the receivers did get more involved in the offense, but it was Dante Thornton along with Chase Cota in that number 3 receiver slot to go with Hudson and Troy Franklin, and then occasionally you saw like a Josh Delgado, but not really as often because we had tight ends on the field a lot. And there's plenty of 11 personnel in his offensive philosophy, at least what he showed at UTSA as well. But a guy like Dorian Singer, I think, could really supplement what Stein wants to do, unless, is Kyler Casper ready to make that year 2 jump and become a part of the offense? What does Jurion Dickey do? I think that's probably a guy that you'd say is the number 3 receiver. But I still think there's a couple personnel questions there, and if they get that sorted out, I think Stein is certainly set up for success. And I don't know who his quarterback is going to be. Looks like it might be Bo Nix, but that has not been officially announced.
Yeah, we'll have to see. I really hope that Will Stein keeps the tight end with a big role, because that room is just loaded with talent at Oregon. And I think we just kind of started to get a little bit of a glimpse of, how they're able to really impact the offense when you can get creative. There were multiple like pump fakes on little swing routes when guys were wide open, like Terrence Ferguson. Terrence Ferguson was leading the nation in receiving touchdowns, I want to say, for a little bit, at least among tight ends. So
And then
he was involved in a
kind
big
of
way.
petered off.
It did. Yeah, it definitely
I was
did.
curious as to why that was.
Well, we got a little bit of breaking news with DJ Johnson announcing his NFL draft declaration. So we'll hit on that maybe on the back end of the show, if that's cool with you, Spencer.
Yeah.
That's kind of what I was just working on here.
Well, he was out of eligibility anyway, and basically is suspended for the bowl game.
Yeah, well, they didn't come out and say anything outright, at least that I saw. But yeah, so that's just a little update that we got today, was that he's officially declaring for the NFL draft. Another interesting comment, this one from Nick. We love it when you guys give us the comments and the questions. Nick says, I really hope he makes an adjustment to his philosophy a bit and ditches the pistol while running more than he has in the past. I think for Oregon, especially with their offensive line and just the talent that they're going to have in the backfield, I wouldn't be surprised, if they're going to still be a run-heavy team. I think seeing that it was that balanced approach from Dillingham, I think was really kind of the sweet spot that they needed to go for. But we also saw some under center work, which is something that we haven't seen at Oregon in forever. I know there's a member of the Oregon media that always asks about, QB sneaks. Shout out to my guy, Jerry Thompson. So I'm sure he was loving it. But yeah, I think that maybe seeing what he does formationally could be interesting. I've kind of been a little bit of a mixed bag with the pistol, or just, always being out of the shotgun. But I think that I think Stein's definitely going to be able to cook something up really nice with the talent that he's got to work with at Oregon.
I'm with my guy Nick P. I'm not a fan of the pistol. When I saw that watching the UTSA offense as much as I could, I was like, I don't know. I don't love that. There are some good components, and it wasn't the primary way that they ran the football. When Oregon fans like myself got turned off of the pistol, it was kind of the base running look that Cristobal wanted to do, because that's what they had done for a long time at Alabama. It's very reliant on your offensive line to make and hold blocks for a long time. You can hit big plays, but it's very boom or bust. Everything is kind of 2 yards or less, or 8 yards or more in the pistol. There's not a ton of in between. I've seen. I'm not saying it never happens, but it's just kind of the way that it's set up, because it's such a long developing play, and it gives the defense time to react. He did add a wrinkle to it that Joe Moorhead added as well, which is that, he'd run a tight end or a receiver out into the flat and give the quarterback an option to make that read, pull it, and dump it out there. And, Joe Moorhead ran that for a first down, 50 times during his 2 years with the Ducks. Like, that play was absolute money. You don't have to be in the pistol, though, to present that sort of look and have that option. So, maybe that was a head coach thing at UTSA. We saw a little bit of pistol early in the year with the Ducks, but then they mostly got away from it. I was okay with how much they used it because I think it does, really sell play action. Like I think the UCLA and BYU games, we took a couple of shots off of pistol running looks. So as long as it's not overly abundant, like okay and whatnot, but I definitely don't want that to be the primary way they run the football. I don't think it will be because Lanning has to have watched what they did this year on the ground and say, yeah, that's what we're striving for, and so they're going to continue with what works. But again, I'm already excited for next season because like I want to, we're going to talk about this stuff for the coming months. But there's not going to be a game for like 9 months. I mean, there'll be a bowl game, of course, but it won't be with Will Stein there. The spring game will be the biggest kind of inside look that we get as outsiders to understand what the offense will look like. And I think the spring game is a great indication of that because last year with Kenny Dillingham, we saw a downfield shot on the first play, and we were all going, well, a little bit of a coverage bust, but at least we're trying to take a downfield shot. And then lo and behold, look what happened this season. We took downfield shots. We had a couple of coverage busts. So I think it's, an exciting thing to look for. And but that's a ways out at this point in time.
The other thing that I really like about Will Stein, and you don't have to go far to find it, you just have to go over to his Twitter at Coach Will Stein. Hashtag feed the studs. That is awesome. That fires me up because if you'll remember Kenny Dillingham when he was laying out his offensive philosophy, it was a scheme, and I think Lanning said it too. It's going to be a scheme that playmakers are going to want to come play in at Oregon. This is when you're thinking about your Jurion Dickey, your Dante Dowdell, your Ashton Kozar, guys like that are already in the fold. If someone's in the groove, keep feeding them. We saw that with breakout games this year from Troy Franklin. You could maybe even talk about Dante Thornton against Utah. I think he had a really big game, and I don't know if Oregon wins that game without him. Some of the big catches he made down the stretch. So I think getting these guys involved is just a huge aspect, a huge dimension of the offense that you want to go, that you really want. And I think it kind of goes without saying that you would want a playmaker, or I'm sorry, a offensive coordinator that's going to get your best players involved. But, I think it's something that we've seen in the past where maybe guys didn't get the ball enough. Look at Troy Franklin last year in 2021. That dude was getting the ball on like screens and like 5-yard slants. And then you get a new offensive coordinator in there who's willing to take the top off the defense. And you see him getting like 50-plus yard receptions against BYU that just electrifies Autzen. I think that might be one of my top moments from the entire season. I wasn't at that BYU game, but just like watching on replay, I could watch it all day. Just the rah from Autzen. I'm like, that is something that was missing for so long. So I think that Stein's going to help just keep some of that continuity between what Dillingham found that was working and then adding some of those wrinkles of his own to make it unique.
Yeah, and earlier I was talking about the similarities between Stein and Dillingham, and I think that's another one. Kenny laid out very clearly that, we're going to run a pro-style offense, and that didn't mean we'd be under center looking like the 49ers and whatnot, but that it was about getting your playmakers the ball in space and getting them into one-on-one situations and taking those shots. And I think that it really wasn't a big component of Oregon's offense in previous years, but we saw guys like Troy Franklin. I think Chris Hudson popped as well. He started to come on at the end of 2021, was, a pretty reliable target for Anthony Brown, but then we saw this year the evolution of Chris Hudson's game, getting him involved in screen passes more. I think he did that a little as a freshman, but getting him pot passes and jet sweeps, but then also taking downfield shots. He had the big play against BYU, another big catch against, or was it or Washington State is the team I'm thinking of. Sorry, and then Arizona as well. And there were a lot of things that he did, and I think going back to that play with Franklin, that's just a concept that Oregon wasn't doing in 2021 in terms of saying, hey, we've got this playmaker, and it felt kind of gratifying for Duck fans because you look at it and say, man, what is the point of recruiting all of this talent, these high-level athletes, if you're not going to trust them to go make plays? And there were just a number of times this year where Bo Nix was trusting his offensive line, and it was set up so that Franklin had a one-on-one with either a corner or a safety, and we took shots. And what do you know? We hit those shots, and it happened time and time again. So that I think was a really great thing from Oregon offensively. And if they continue to do that, I think it has nothing but positive ramifications for the Ducks.
Yeah, so there's no shortage of offensive weapons, even though it's funny, I didn't really think about it until you asked me, go 4 wide, who are you putting in there? And after you get past Franklin and Hudson, it's definitely a little bit of a question mark.
Probably Jerion Dickey, assuming he stays committed. Like that looks like the sort of talent. Yeah, Casper Casper barely played this year, so that's a question mark. And Dickey, in a way, is as well. But the way his stock has continued to rise and the interest he's gotten from other schools, he definitely seems like a guy who is a week one impact.
Sure.
Physically he's ready. He doesn't need to put on weight. He doesn't need to, gain speed or anything like that. He's got really the whole package. He's kind of a Debo Samuel type. He's kind of thick, runs the whole route tree, great hands, great agility, but he's strong and powerful as well. He looks like the sort of prospect and plays at a position that would allow for him to get to Eugene and start playing right away.
Yeah, I mean, from what I've been able to see from him in person and from the people that I've talked to, around that recruitment, I think he's definitely a guy that projects to be ready right away. One of the recent updates that I got from him is that he doesn't look he's going to be signing early. So it looks like it's more of a February timeframe, which kind of does leave the door open for other schools.
Don't love that. Do not love that.
It's not the best update, but I'm here to bring you the news regardless of what happens. Penn State.
If Dante commits on the 21st, I'll feel okay about it. But
if he signs.
Yeah, like if Dante signs, I think that's a really easy thing for Jerion to visualize and say, that's the guy who's going to throw me the ball. And Dante's really good.
Yeah, no, I totally agree. So I think, just the rest of this month between now and the early signing period, we're going to get a lot more clarity on, I think, what next year's team is looking like. Quarterback is obviously the biggest question mark right now, I think, on the roster. But we did get another little bit of update, so we can end the show with this. Oregon edge rusher DJ Johnson declared for the NFL draft, and Oregon's defensive front is already projected to look quite a bit different, right? You have DJ with this news today, so he's not going to be back next year. You have Justin Flo hitting the portal. He didn't play a lot, didn't really carve out a significant role at Oregon. But he was a big name on that defense. And then you have Jackson LeDuc hit the portal. Braden Buckner hit the portal, and then we don't know what's going to happen with Brandon Dorless. My kind of gut tells me that he's going to try to go to the NFL.
Yeah.
I would think that Noah would try to go to the NFL too. So Oregon's defensive front is going to be looking a lot different. That front seven, and DJ Johnson and Brandon Dorless, those are obviously the two top pass rushers. So you got to find some dudes and do it in a hurry.
You do. And Casey Rogers, Sam Taimani, they can all come back. Jordan Riley cannot. So, we'll see if those guys on the interior are back for another season. But, I mean, DJ Johnson, Brandon Dorless, easily your two best pass rushers. And your third, Noah Sewell. And this was a year in which Oregon struggled to consistently get after the passer. Like, that is such a position of need and a question mark. I could argue, Max, it's a bigger concern roster-wise than quarterback.
Sure.
I think you could 100% argue that, because Bo Nix may or may not be back. But let's say he leaves and you keep Dante Moore committed. There's an option. Maybe Ty Thompson, the light goes on in year 3, or you can go and add a transfer. It's modern college football. That is always an option. So I look at that defensive line and say, man, what is it going to be? And then the question of, or the element of unknown with that, to me, is greater than the element of unknown at the quarterback. Because I think you can find some options in there, whether it's like DJU, I'm going to talk about that on my show tomorrow, Hudson Card, Spencer Sanders. There are a lot of quarterbacks in the portal who are very capable. So we'll have to wait and see on that front. But yeah, losing your two best pass rushers in a year where you didn't get after the passer very well is not a great place to be on the defensive side of the ball.
Yeah, and then just to wrap it up, to stay on your point about the D line being a bigger kind of question mark than the quarterback position right now, Oregon kind of had, for all intents and purposes, it wasn't a perfect season, but they figured out the quarterback position this year with Bo Nix. even with a guy who was in legitimate consideration, or at least at the very least a dark horse for the Heisman, there were still major, question marks or deficiencies on that defense. All of the teams that win national titles, they're full loaded with difference makers along that defensive line. And you could argue that that is the position that has kind of been, from a recruiting standpoint, the most underwhelming for Oregon recently. They got KT, obviously, but all these teams, they have multiple first round picks along that defensive line. And that's just not where Oregon's at right now. Does that mean they don't have talent along the defensive line? No, it's just not good enough. And I think that that is a key point when I think back to that game against Georgia when Kirby Smart said, he won't say it, but Dan Lanning knows we have better players than he does. And that's just facts.
Like we all know that. We can say that. Like yeah,
look at
Georgia
Jalen Carter and these other guys.
Yeah, Jalen Carter's a monster. I hope my Seahawks draft him this year because the interior of our defensive line stinks. But you look at guys like that, and even think about the last time Oregon got to, or the only time they got to the college football playoff. Yes, you had great offensive weapons. You had a really good O-line. You had the best player in program history. The offense was amazing. Look at who was on that defense, though. Was it a Georgia-level defense? No, but you still need more players. You had DeForest Buckner. You had Eric Armstead. You had Troy Hill was in that secondary. Until he got hurt, you had Efo, who was going to be an NFL player. You had Joe Walker, I believe, who made NFL rosters and played in the league. You had a lot of guys. Last time Oregon had a great defense, 2019. That secondary is all over the league. Diamador Lenore starts for the 49ers. Javon Holland is a stud. Thomas Graham, I don't know if he plays a ton, but I know that he's good enough to make an active roster. Like, you just go up and down the board and you say you need more guys who can play at the next level. And that defensive line was a little Kayvon Thibodeau dependent, but they were better than what the defensive line was this year, and they had a guy like Kayvon Thibodeau who could just cause havoc to get you off the field. So that's the direction that they've got to go, and you just have to have more guys who are NFL caliber players. It doesn't have to be a Georgia. It doesn't have to be an Alabama of old, but it has to be good enough to get you stops and key spots to allow your offense to thrive.
100%. Well, I know we were supposed to get out of here around the 40-minute mark, so we'll go ahead and wrap there, Spencer. Before we do, where can people find more of you and what you got going on?
At Smalls_55 on Twitter, as always, or at Locked On Ducks, which is available on YouTube or wherever you listen to your podcasts, Monday through Friday. That continues into the off-season, as Josh Pate would say. So that is content that is going to continue to come your way. Talk plenty of football. Hopefully Oregon basketball gives me something to get excited about here soon. At the moment, iffy, middling, and such, but there's so much to get to with football. It's going to be dominating my show for the next couple months. And Max, it's great to be on with you as always, and good to see you, Duck fans.
Appreciate you coming on, Spencer. You guys make sure you tap in and lock in with Spencer. If you want to find more of me, you can follow me on Twitter at mtorresports. You can find more of my written content covering Oregon football and Oregon football recruiting at ducksdigest.com. You can subscribe to my YouTube channel at Oregon Football Max Torres. Appreciate you guys that stopped by for the live show today. And then the biggest way you can show your support is to share the Ducks Dish podcast with your friends, with your family, with other Duck fans. You know how it goes over here. But that'll do it for us on this episode of the Ducks Dish podcast. A big thank you to Spencer for hopping on, and we'll catch you guys in the next episode of the Ducks Dish podcast.